communications as it acts as a basic building block or tool to support survival. Different people communicate differently, either verbally or non-verbally. We work and live with people who are from different geographies and diverse backgrounds of culture and language. Thus, it becomes very essential for all to work hard on their communication skills to pass the correct information to the right person at the right time. So for today's video, I will share to you what I have learned in Module 3 that talks about verbal and non-verbal communication. We'll talk about its differences and explain as well the type of verbal and non-verbal communication. First, let's have the non-verbal communication. So what is non-verbal communication? Non-verbal communication is the widely used method in the communication process where a person doesn't use a single word or language to pass his or her message or information to other people. So when a person doesn't use the word to converse with others, rather uses visual cues such as facial expression, gestures, eye contact, posture, body language, tone of voice to express their feeling to convey the message, then it is called a non-verbal communication. So the library episode from classic Mr. Bean showed the non-verbal communication, wherein through hand gestures and facial expressions they were able to understand what that particular person wants to convey. So let's proceed to types of nonverbal communication. First, we have facial expressions. Facial expressions are responsible for a huge proportion of nonverbal communication. Consider how much information can be conveyed with a smile or frown. The look on a person's face is often the first thing we see even before we hear what they have to say. So while nonverbal communication and behavior can vary dramatically between cultures, the facial expressions for happiness, sadness, anger, and fear are similar throughout the world. So that is facial expression. Next is gestures. Deliberate movement and signals are an important way to communicate meaning without words. So common gestures including waving, pointing, and using fingers to indicate numerical amounts. So other gestures are arbitrary and related to culture. In courtroom setting, lawyers have been known to utilize different nonverbal signals to attempt to sway juror opinions. An attorney might glance at his watch to suggest that the opposing lawyer's argument is tedious, or might even roll his eyes at the testimony offered by a witness in an attempt to undermine his or her credibility. So these nonverbal signals are seen as being so powerful and influential that some judges even place limits on what type of nonverbal behaviors are allowed in a courtroom. And like for example, in a deaf person, they uses gestures to communicate. So for example, the deaf person wanted to say sorry to a person, so they use hand gestures like this. And if they wanted to say thank you. Those are the common gestures I know that deaf person uses to communicate. Third, we have paralinguistics. Paralinguistics refers to vocal communication that is separate from actual language. This includes factors such as tone of voice, loudness, inflection, and pitch. Consider the powerful effect the tone of voice can have on the meaning of a sentence. When said in a strong tone of voice, listeners might interpret approval and enthusiasm. The same word said in a hesitant tone of voice might convey disapproval and a lack of interest. Consider all the different ways that simply changing your tone of voice might change the meaning of a sentence. A friend might ask you how you are doing and you might respond with the standard, I'm fine. But how you actually say those words might reveal a tremendous amount of how you are really feeling. So, a cold tone of voice might suggest that you are actually not fine, but you don't wish to discuss it. A bright, happy tone of voice will reveal that you are actually doing quite well. A sober, downcast tone would indicate that you are opposite of fine and that perhaps your friend should inquire further. So, for example, in cold tone, so I'm fine. And then in a happy tone, saying I'm fine, I'm totally fine. So, there's a difference. So, that's all. Next, body language and posture. So, posture and movements can also convey a great deal of information. Research on body language has grown significantly since the 1970s, but popular media have focused on the other interpretation of defensive posture, arm crossing, and leg crossing, especially after publishing the Julius Fast book Body Language. So while these nonverbal behaviors can indicate feelings and attitudes, research suggests that body language is far more subtle and less definitive than previously believed. Next is proxemics. It's a branch of knowledge that deals with the amount of space that people feel it necessary to set between themselves and others. People often refer to their need for personal space, which is also an important type of nonverbal communication. The amount of distance we need and the amount of space we perceive as belonging to us is influenced by a number of factors, including social norms, cultural expectations, situational factors, personality, characteristics, and level of familiarity. And that is proxemics. Eye gaze. Looking, staring, and blinking are all nonverbal activities that can be used to communicate nonverbally. Persons blinking raise, rise, and their pupils dilate when they come across people or items they enjoy. Looking at the other person can convey a variety of feelings such as hatred, interest, or attraction. People also use eye gazing to judge whether or not someone is being truthful. Normal, steady eye contact is frequently interpreted as an indication that someone is telling the truth and is trustworthy. While on the other hand, shifty eyes or inability to keep an eye contact is often interpreted as a sign of deception or lying. So that is eye gaze. And we have haptics. Another important nonverbal action is communicating through touch. The role of touch in infancy and early childhood has been the subject of a lot of research. So the classic monkey research by Harry Harlow showed that development is hampered by lack of touch and interaction. The behavior and social interaction of baby monkeys reared by wire mothers was permanently impaired. Affection, familiarity, sympathy, and other emotion can be all communicated through touch. So that is haptics. And now, let's talk about verbal communication. Verbal communication includes sounds, words, language, and speech. Speaking is an effective way of communicating and helps in expressing our emotion in words. This form of communication is further classified into 4 types, which are: first, we have intrapersonal communication. So this form of communication is extremely private and restricted to ourselves. It includes the silent conversations we have with ourselves, wherein we juggle roles between the sender and receiver, who are processing our thoughts and action. This process of communication, when analyzed, can either be conveyed verbally to someone or stay confined as thoughts. Second is interpersonal communication. This form of communication takes place between two individuals and is thus a one-on-one conversation. Here, the two individuals involved will swap the roles of sender and receiver in order to communicate in a clearer manner. And then third, we have small group communication. So this type of communication can take place only when there are more than two people involved. Here, the number of people will be small enough to allow each participant to interact and converse with the rest. So press conferences, board meetings, and team meetings are examples of group communication. So, unless a specific issue is being discussed, small group discussion can become chaotic and difficult to interpret by everybody. So, this lag in understanding information will lead into miscommunication. And lastly, we have public communication. This type of communication takes place when one individual addresses a large gathering of people. Election campaigns and public speeches are example of this type of communication. In such cases, there is usually a single sender of information and several receivers who are being addressed of the information or the message. So, main differences between verbal and nonverbal communication. Verbal communication involves the proper usage of words and language. Whereas in nonverbal communication, no words or language are used to communicate, rather expressions convey the message. In verbal communication, the physical presence of the sender and receiver is not necessary, whereas in nonverbal communication, physical appearance of the person is essential. In verbal communication, the message is easily conveyed and understood by the recipient, whereas in nonverbal communication, recipient can easily miss either some part or the whole message. So that would be all for Module 3 about verbal and nonverbal communication. Thank you!